Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Stihl 011 AVT top handle chainsaw. The customer complaint is that it won't idle. The mechanic complaint is that it's full of poop. Not thrilled about that, but what are you going to do, right? So let's start by blowing some chicken feathers and some poop out of the way. I mean, where was he storing this thing? In a coop? Look in the fuel tank. That's what we're doing. I mean, it looks okay. There's a filter in there. Not a ton of stuff. Let's run it and see what it sounds like. Alright, it didn't want to idle. Maybe if it was a little warmer it would keep idling, not sure. Maybe a simple carburetor adjustment would fix it. More than likely that carburetor adjustment would just cover up some other problem. It's been my experience that, well, one, that Stihl top handle chainsaws are a pain in the butt to get the spark plug out of. At least the old ones. But it's been my experience that carburetors usually only need to be adjusted to compensate for altitude or temperature. Now, is it possible that it's not idling because the carb is set for a colder or hotter environment? Maybe. But it's more likely that this old saw needs a little attention. So let's take a look at the air filter. You know, if the air filter is plugged up, it's going to run rich, and it might not want to idle. At first glance, it looks like the filter's in great shape, but this filter actually draws from the other side. So let's pull it out and flip it over and see what it looks like. Yeah, it's pretty rough, pretty plugged up. I wonder how many people pull that cover off of there and just think, hey, it looks great, and then don't do anything. This may be one of those cases. And that plugged air filter alone, that could explain the running issue. But we're not going to stop here. This carburetor, it comes off of here pretty easy. You have two screws that bolt it down, one fuel line because there's no purge bulb, and a piece of throttle linkage. Before we get into that carburetor, we're going to put a new spark plug in here. Crank it down. That looks good. Get our boot in place. Alright. I keep getting sidetracked. I want to get this carburetor off of here. Now I'm going to dump the fuel out because when I remove the line from the carburetor, I don't want it spitting fuel all over me. This fuel smells fine. I don't know what kind of oil he's using, so it's hard to really say if it's dark from age or not, but because it smells fine, I don't really question the fuel. Let's take the filter out and see what that looks like. You know, on this Stihl chainsaw, the filter is going to come right out of the tank and you can service it. There's a lot of Stihls that's not the case. There can be a real pain in the butt to get the filter out. I'm just going to use this hook here and grab the fuel line and yank it out. Now, normally this actually comes out pretty easy, but this fuel line is really getting stiff. I can barely pull the filter off of there. And, you know, we're going to replace that when we get around to it here. Alright, I was saying there are 2 screws that hold the carburetor down. Just a flathead screwdriver is all that's needed for taking this apart. Get the second one out of here. There's a grommet here that goes over the adjustment screws, keeps the dust out of here. We'll just clean that up a little bit. And then we have a piece of throttle linkage and the fuel line, right? Be careful not to drop any schmutz down the throat there. I got the carburetor off of the linkage. And it's important when you remove the carb from that linkage to take a close look at which hole it was in, because I think there's like 5 holes on this one. Let's get this fuel line off of here. We have harvested a carburetor. Yeah, look, there are at least 5 different places where that linkage could be attached. So take a look at that, and if you didn't look at it, you can usually tell because there's some wear in that one hole. We got that old fuel line out of there. It just passes through the wall there. We're going to use some official Echo branded fuel line to replace that. We can cut it to the same length. Put a little taper on the end and just push it through. The way this is laid out, it's easy to go through the fill hole and grab the end of that line and pull it through. This really couldn't be easier to work on. It's just that spark plug is kind of hard to get at. It's kind of hard to look in there without a camera. So we're going to open up the carb and see what there is to see inside of here. So if you like watching these repair videos on Stihl chainsaws, then I recommend that you go to Erica's channel. It's called Married with Small Engines. Her and her husband have a shop in Canada, and among others, they're a Stihl dealer. And she does a lot of excellent videos on repairing Stihl chainsaws. If she does other things besides saws, I don't remember seeing any of those videos, but she does an excellent job. So we have a metering diaphragm here, and you'll notice that there's dirt on the face of it, and some people get excited about that. Well, the cap that we took off of there, the cover, it's got a hole in it because that has to be vented. If it wasn't vented, that thing wouldn't move back and forth like it's supposed to. So dirt will get in there. It'll find its way in. Not anything to be concerned about unless it's packed in there so tight that the diaphragm can't move. So the diaphragm itself was kind of stiff. Was the problem, is it going to be the diaphragm, or is it going to be that dirty air filter? Or is it going to be something else we might stumble across here? Could be a combination of all of it. So on this side we have the fuel pump. That's this blue piece. That brown Teflon pump diaphragm is actually the better diaphragm, but it's not the right one to fit this carburetor, so we got to use the blue one. We stack the gasket on top of the pump diaphragm, and then we put the pump cover on. I'm holding the throttle linkage open a little bit to get past this idle stop screw, so I can set that cover on there nice and even, square. On the metering chamber side of the carburetor, we have a metering lever and a needle and a spring. We loosen the screw, a little bit of schmutz in there. We loosen the screw and we can lift out the metering lever and the needle. And in this case, you see how this needle is like silver and then it's got a little orange band in it? Well, the rubber part of the needle is actually all orange. And the silver stuff is some kind of preservative or something that was put on the needle from the factory. If the needle comes with that stuff on it, I always clean it off. This one did not. This one was clean. So it just goes in there. We hooked the needle onto the metering lever, dropped it in place over the spring, and then tightened the screw down. After checking the metering lever height, I then put the metering diaphragm on there. I had the gasket sandwiched underneath it, so you didn't really see that step. Carb's got a kit in it. We're going to call that refreshing the carburetor. You'll notice I didn't even remove the adjustment screws or clean anything out. And about 95% of the time, this is how I do it. I don't, unless there's a lot of gunk in the fuel, or if I see rust. And even then, if I see rust, I usually don't go for the cleaning. I go for the replacement. Why do I do it that way? Well, I've been pretty successful doing it that way. Sometimes when you try to fix a carb that's got rust in it or a lot of gunk or whatever, you're chasing problems, running the thing through the ultrasonic cleaner multiple times. The time put into it could have been spent on a carburetor and you'd been done with it. So I got the carb bolted back down. I got the throttle linkage in place. The fuel line is on there. We push the dust boot in. Everything looks pretty. We're going to flush cut the end of the fuel line and then push a new filter on here. There we go. And that drops in a tank nice with that fresh new line we got on there. Going to put some fresh fuel in here. And then we're going to try and start this thing up. You'll see that I put the old filter on here after cleaning it out. I have to order a new filter. I didn't have one in stock. So then I'll try and start this thing. And if it does start and it does idle, then that's all I'm going to have for you on a Stihl 011 AVT top panel chainsaw that wouldn't idle. Thanks for watching. Later.